We are live. Welcome to the Sunday MMA show. After a pretty damn good weekend of fights, particularly the UFC card. Let me know in the chat that the audio is going through fine. I appreciate that. All right, UFC 272 in the books, and quite a damn night for sure. I think, at least from my perspective, we got much more of a fight out of the Covington Masvidal main event than could have been expected. We'll get into all of that as the show goes on, but I grade every fight, and it's the highest fight score I've ever given a fight. Maybe not the best fight I've ever seen, or certainly not the best fight I've ever seen, but as I've been revamping my system for evaluating fights under this new system, I give it a potential of 100 points, and I gave the fight a 96 because of the importance, the spectacle of it, and the overall performance of both men, particularly Covington, and it really paid off. I'd like to know what everybody's thinking about the fight card. And were you satisfied? Did it meet your expectations, that main event? What surprised you? What caught you off guard? And did you buy into the Frenemies narrative? 100%? 50%? Not at all? Did you think they were going to hug it out at the end? That was the one thing I was positive of. Whether the rift between Colby and Jorge was 100% legitimate or not, I felt we knew they weren't going to hug it out at the end, regardless of how the thing ended. And they certainly did not. All right, sounds good. We got here. Okay, great. So everything's sounding good. Drew, good to see you, my friend. John Wayne, good to see you again. Huey, Bumby, Carlos, and Pulse Reloaded. Pulse Reloaded says, no more pay-per-views without a title fight, please. Yeah, well, they were kind of, I don't know if they were exactly stuck, but everybody seemed to be either not fighting or already lined up to fight. So they were a little bit of a spot waiting for, every month you got to pay that cost, man, to be the boss. The UFC's got to make their dough, of course, and they're going to put out a pay-per-view. The fight card overall I thought was great. It was, there have been a lot more hits than misses for a long time now, but last night's card was particularly good, entertaining. Not a ton of maybe household names or stars at the very top of their game, but we did see a nice mixture of guys on the rise. And I think, for one, Kevin Holland definitely stamped himself a contender, or at the very least, a serious prospect in the 170-pound division. And Bryce Mitchell, I think, is very close, if not to actually breaking into that top 15. It's difficult division to break into that. He passed the test for sure. Nurmagomedov looked as good as he could look, as well as advertised, and delivered the goods for sure against a blue-collar, bit of a journeyman guy in Brian Kelleher, but one who oftentimes rises to the occasion, and he couldn't get it done on the feet against Nurmagomedov, and once it went to the grappling, which that's actually Kelleher's bread and butter. That's what he, even though he sort of made his name once in the UFC with having some pretty memorable scraps, it's his grappling that put him where he is, and is his foundation. And he just had no answers for what Nurmagomedov was able to do. Very impressive. Let's get into the main event. There is a bit of a format this week. I'll talk about the main event, start with that, work through the main card, then circle around and hit some of the highlights from the prelim card. And there's also a few topics I'd put up if you want to go to the description of the video. It says some of the topics, including Makachev, which, if you follow me on Twitter, you saw that as soon as he was supposedly calling out Dos Anjos as a late replacement, I posted, "Don't be fooled by this. It's not Makachev making these posts. It's clearly Abdel Aziz, his manager. That's the stock and trade of Ali as a manager. And it's worked well for him in the past. Later in the show, we'll get into what I think it ended up costing Makachev any chance of getting the title shot. I don't believe the UFC ever wanted to give him the title shot off of the run he's on. They wanted to see him get at least one solid victory against a top 10 guy who wasn't coming in late notice or from some other extenuating circumstance. This opens the door, cue the boos, for Conor to swoop in and Dana and company to cash that cow, ring that bell, and give Conor a title fight, as crazy as that might be. I'm begrudgingly starting to think that might happen. Circling back around, going to the main event, we had Colby Covington, the very solid number one contender at 170 pounds, versus Masvidal, George Masvidal, at the time 6th ranked. Masvidal was a plus 240, Covington minus 310. Covington gets the unanimous decision, and it was, Masvidal had his moment in the 4th round, but other than that, it was pure class from Covington. In fact, it was towards the end of the 2nd round, I started thinking, if this Colby Covington could show up against Usman, he probably takes home the strap. Unless Usman has his best performance as well. On an average or a slightly off night, that type of performance would get it done against Usman, I believe. But whether or not Colby could do that and bring everything together, have a good camp, be healthy, have his mind right, it's hard to tell. He certainly didn't want to push the pace against Usman the way he did against Masvidal. Masvidal has the threat of the striking as well, but no threat of serious grappling. And the times we saw George go to the grappling, it was a huge mistake. Colby was able to quickly turn it back around and get position on him. And so it makes me think that Covington's actual issue with going full bore 100% against Usman wasn't so much his fear of getting hit with something. And a lot of people theorize that was what kept Covington at bay, particularly in that 2nd fight. I'm now thinking it has more to do with, if he gets tired and Usman isn't as tired, he could get out wrestled in a serious way and really be put in a bad position. Against Masvidal, there was no such concern. In fact, anytime, as I said, Masvidal wanted to engage with the grappling, it was simply handing Covington a gift. At the introductions of the fight, a couple things I found interesting was Masvidal seemed the most comfortable we've seen him at the start of a fight since the Askren fight. He was talking to the camera the way he usually does, blowing the kisses, throwing them to his daughters at home. That was the way Masvidal did for years. He was a little different when he was in there against Usman. I don't know if it was the pressure of the moment or the potential of what it would mean to win that fight. He seemed to return to a calm. I think Jorge knew he was either going to get an amazing victory or he was going to get dominated by Colby. Perhaps Jorge thought he would have a little more success on the feet, but he just didn't, particularly with the hands. He had the one big strike in the fourth round, and he landed a couple other occasional nice strikes. But it was really the only thing Masvidal could get going at all was the kicks. The kicks to Colby's legs. And the broadcast crew theorized maybe those kicks had an effect in the first round, but we didn't see it throughout the rest of the fight. So it's the kind of approach that's great if 60 or 70% of Masvidal's output were those types of leg kicks, but he could also mix in the striking. He could have had a shot, but he couldn't get his offense going. He had some nice counters, but he couldn't get his hands going. Colby's head movement, kudos and props to, I believe it's Cesar Carneras, Daniel Carneras, I believe. The coach at Colby's new gym. Excellent job. And those guys have brought a few fighters along, none of the profile of Covington, but Colby actually had good head movement and good overall movement, something that Masvidal completely lacked in this fight. He was pulling back, pulling his head straight back. It was pretty clear by the middle of the fight that Masvidal was perhaps more concerned about saving face and sort of shrugging off what Colby was doing, trying to no-sell Colby's dominance, than actually trying to win the fight. So during the intros, Colby looked more serious than we've seen him in other fights. He wasn't smiling as much. He was really focused on controlling his breathing. He was taking a few very deep breaths, letting it out, that big exhale. Those are soothing gestures we do. They calm us down. And you weren't sure if that meant this is more stress for Colby, high anxiety, or is he just letting the emotions go, clearing his mind, and when the bell rings, he's ready to go? And that turned out to be the case. Let's jump into some of the chat here. And I'll run back to some of the questions in the beginning that are not relating to the main event. Pulse Reloaded says, Kamaru already broke Jorge in his last outing. Colby beat a broken man last night and almost got KO'd himself in the process. I disagree. Nothing broken about Masvidal. He got caught clean and was knocked out. If Usman had touched him up, Colby touched Masvidal up much more than what Usman was able to do. Particularly in the first fight, he couldn't do much with his hands. But that one shot, it's almost a do-over shot for fighters, particularly guys like Masvidal who live by the sword, die by the sword. He hadn't been knocked out in a very long time, or maybe never. Certainly not like that. But it still when you're of Masvidal's mindset, that hunter mentality, you know you're going to strike out sometimes, and it's almost like a free pass. He got knocked out. It ends his bid at the championship, but for Masvidal, that was just a pivot. He got the new contract. We saw him very going into Conor mode again, selling a product during the press conference, playing the bored, why am I even here talking sort of role against Colby. Jorge was really selling his brand and perpetuating his persona during the build-up, which is smart for him to do. The guy's a fan favorite. He's become an icon in the sport, and there's a lot of big fights for George in the future. No, he's not a broken man at all. The guy he always has a fighter's chance, which is more than a puncher's chance. He has a fighter's chance. He could have won the belt, but it was always unlikely he was going to win the belt. He worked himself into getting 2 opportunities because how he changed his persona after he came back from his sabbatical, being on the reality show in South America. The story's pretty well known. He came back a different man and realized that he can't just play the stoic, hard street fighter role anymore. That he had to let some of his natural charisma go. Share a little bit of who he is with the fans. And it took Jorge a long time to feel comfortable and realize that he could do that. And to me, he's had the greatest success turnaround of a career we've ever seen. Not just in the outcome of his fights, because he still got beat by Stephen Thompson after changing his mentality. He got beat by Colby. He got beat twice by Usman. But he cemented himself as a go-to fighter. He still has a fight with McGregor if he wants it. A fight number 2 with Diaz if he wants it. Quite honestly, he could probably get a fight for with Covington if he spins the narrative right. So very much not a broken man, in my opinion. Go through here. Nadav Drew says, what's up with George's horrible, terrible tattoo? Yeah, I was going to comment on that. It supposedly is a shadowed outline of the jumping knee he knocked out Ben Askren with, but it looks a little bit like a 5th grader drew an icon for Magic the Gathering. It not in execution, not well done. But it could have been. It was a good idea. He probably shouldn't have gone to a friend. He probably should have gone to a professional. Jerry Lynn asks, hey, brother, please review next week's card. Yes. I won't do that on this show, but I am considering and working towards the idea of doing a Friday show. It would be in the evening, and sort of reviewing some of the news from the week and previewing the next night's fight card. And I'm not sure if I'll start it this week. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to me, follow me on Twitter, and I'll let everybody know. I definitely want to start doing that because it's pretty interesting. Plus, that show could be a little looser, take more calls, see what people are excited about, which matchups, and how they're viewing things. John Wayne asks about the body language breakdown of Colby and Masvidal press conference. I do have an episode, famous last words, that's largely finished. It's not focused just on the press conference, and I do plan on still putting it out. It's a broader overview of their rivalry, and gets into some speculation about what their motivation is and where they were trying to go with things. And I think working in how the fight played out and the next few days to a week, how they both talked to the press, I'll be able to put all of that together, because I'm still of a mind that it's not a complete work that they had a falling out, but I do believe Dan Lambert and Jorge Masvidal, at the very least, let's just say this: if you follow the money, it's very convenient, particularly for Masvidal, to have had this falling out with Colby. Now, is that the reason for the falling out? I don't know, but Masvidal seems to have clearly used that to his advantage. And Covington's playing such a two-dimensional character at this point. Masvidal, being a smart guy and very good at switching roles, pretty much knew Covington would have to go along. So Covington didn't even need to be in on it. It's best not to bring a guy in on that because he can't act. Where Masvidal finds the reality in every role he plays. Whether he's being charming, being intimidating, the dude's scary as hell when he wants to be, the silent assassin. Just ask Leon Edwards about that character. The dude has dynamic range. He's pretty much the Daniel Day-Lewis of the fight promoting game. Here in the chat, Michael O'Brien says, Colby's ability to stay locked into his game plan is great to see. So many times people allow their opponents to drag them into wars. One of my favorite fighters to watch. Pressure, cardio, wrestling. I agree. He stuck to the game plan, but I don't know if we're seeing a true blossoming of Covington or if this is a one-off because of everything that went into the fight. But it wasn't that he was just ardent in following a rigid game plan. He's able to mix the wrestling and the grappling as well as anyone we've seen since Dos Anjos was champ at 155. And with Dos Anjos, he wasn't nearly the grappler that Covington is. And Covington's striking is getting to the point where now, even when it's not pretty, it's still extremely effective. And being able to blend those two together, because I don't think Masvidal was expecting Covington to be as effective with the strikes. Not just using the strikes to get in close and grab and hug and drag them down, but to really land some nice shots. In the first 2 rounds, for sure, Covington was overthrowing some of his shots. And a couple of them landed, and you could tell by Jorge's reaction that they had a little pop on them. But he brought himself back into his game plan as the fight started to play out, and that's when he became ultra effective. Now, it's my opinion that in the 3rd, maybe 4th round, early in the 4th round, Masvidal was so spent, and it wasn't just the cardio. You have to remember, when you're working that hard, particularly in the grappling, when you're a striker, it's not just that your lungs are burning. Your muscles are noodles. That's why in the 4th round, when Masvidal seemed to have maybe Colby on the ropes, or potentially putting him on the ropes, Jorge didn't even pursue him. Wild. I've come to expect that from Nate Diaz, but he's got that don't give a fuck attitude. Where Masvidal, this being such a bitter rivalry, you'd expect him to want to finish it, to cut off Covington's head. And he just wanted to rest. He was glad that he was stunned Colby because it gave him 25, 30 seconds to rest. And there were several times up against the cage starting in the 3rd round where Masvidal could have circled off and Bisping pointed that out. He could have circled out, gotten back to the center, and didn't. In fact, allowed Covington to engage in the grappling again. It gave him a respite from, well, pun intended, the chaos of Colby's aggression. A little calm in the middle of a storm, which is just another indication of how effective Colby's overall game is. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see where he goes from here. He's fishing for the Dustin Poirier fight. There's no way Dustin wants to come up and fight him. No way. I don't even know why Dustin is mad at Colby. What he said. He said Brazil was a dump. You know, people say worse things than that. It got blown out of proportion and affected some of the people in his gym at the time. And Dustin's a real emotional guy, and he prides himself, and this is a great attribute, he prides himself on loyalty and being a local guy. Even though he spends a lot of his time now in South Florida, he still has his foundation working to build up some of the underprivileged communities in Louisiana. So the dude took it as a dishonor sort of in general, and it offended his teammates. So Dustin got emotional. You remember how he went after Nate Diaz right before or after his Dustin's surgery, and kind of made an ass of himself. Later apologized for some of it. He's an emotional guy, and he needs to use that emotion as a fighter and as a person. And I think it got him. He got out over his skis a little bit with Covington. Now, if Colby is clever enough or lucky enough, he might be able to bait. He might be able to bait Dustin into actually fighting him, particularly if the UFC finds a need for that fight, because that would be a great 5-round co-main event. You put it on. You put it on a numbered event, put it on a pay-per-view, put a solid main event, and then you have Covington versus Dustin Poirier. And from Dustin's perspective, even though you'd expect him to be a massive underdog, should he beat Covington or even look good against Covington in spots and not get finished, it raises his stock. It potentially gives him purchase in another division. He can bounce back and forth. It's going to be a while before he gets a shot at the title. So it might be something Dustin could be looking to do. Hard to tell at this point. Go through the chat here for a second. Oh, Antonio says, so many eye pokes. It's such a shame they still don't have that glove problem fixed. Yes, absolutely. I didn't see the Covington one live, clearly from Masvidal's reaction, and then Herb looked on the replay and showed that it was an eye poke. The Kennedy fight, that really bothered me because Kennedy and Njokuani, my heart always goes out to him because he's a guy that has a lot of apprehension in the cage, and you can see that he's battling demons in there. The guy's got all the talent in the world. Njokuani, I'm talking about. Kennedy, yeah, I think I'm just saying that right. Anyways, and you could tell he was trying to keep his fingers under control, and he was doing the world's lousiest job at it. Now, in my opinion, you've got to step in and be strong. And I've said this before. In every other sport, if there is a foul, then there's a penalty assessed. It doesn't matter what your intention is. Intention is only a modifier making the penalty worse. So you can get thrown out of a game You can get a misconduct in hockey, and then it's a double minor or a major, so it's 5 minutes or 4 minutes on the power play instead of 2. I believe in soccer. That's why they've got all the different colored penalty cards. You can get ejected from the game. That's the way it should be in MMA. If you commit a serious foul, not just a ticky-tack, but you actually make contact with the other fighter's eye with one of your fingers, it is a point deduction. No question about it. Now, if it's the second or third one, or it's really egregious and there's blood, that's actually a rule in hockey. Any penalty that draws blood is a double minor. So that was the case in the New Marano versus Kennedy in Nzechukwu fight, where Kennedy poked him, and the second time he actually drew blood, striking the inside of the eye, the fold on the inside near the bridge of the nose. So to me, he should have taken 2 points from Kennedy instead of the 1. It's rough. A lot of times fighters aren't trying to do it, but if you start to penalize it hard, fighters will change their behavior. Get to the chat here, a few more. Drew says Hardy's career is plummeting to an end. Yeah, the guy will always have the threat of power. Right at this point, the UFC may let him go because his upside seems capped. I can't see him beating, at least with regularity, any technical fighters. Even if they don't knock him out or finish him, you can either outpoint the guy or simply take him down. So, and he'd be the perfect fighter for Bellator. Absolutely perfect heavyweight. Just a dude that can go in there. He's either going to knock somebody out or get knocked out. And all the Joe the Plumbers they've got over there in the heavyweight division of Bellator. And I know they've got a few, was it Nemkov over there as well? Is that right? Or is he light heavy? Either way, the prototype isn't very impressive for heavyweight over at Bellator at this point. So let him go over there. John Wayne says, when Umar Nurmagomedov won, Khabib kept whispering in his ear when the decision was announced. Do you think Khabib did that on purpose to take the attention from his cousin onto himself? Well, Khabib's a savvy guy, but I will say he definitely wants overall attention, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's not a bad thing. He has an ego, and he's the leader. So the leader should be the one who takes the slings and arrows, puts himself in the bad spot, but also gets overall credit. I don't believe Khabib would ever want to take the spotlight away from one of his fighters when they're supposed to have their moment. I don't see Khabib doing that. It was very interesting in the Tagir Ulanbekov fight, because Khabib was very upset about that. He was, you could see him if you looked down and saw Khabib in the corner while the fight was going on. You know, the guy is clearly very invested in his fighters, showing way more emotional connection to the fight for his fighters than he ever did in his own career. I mean, that is a guy who seldom, except for when he was hurt by leg kicks, that was virtually the only time you really saw emotion from Khabib in the cage. So no, I would say Khabib was not trying to take the spotlight from one of his fighters. And I think he's very proud of Umar. The guy does so many things well. He's got the grappling to back up the name Nurmagomedov. But again, as I've said, he's one of these Dagestani dudes that absolutely has a lethal kicking game. And I think they said on the broadcast, once he brings his striking, his hands to where his kicks are, the guy's going to be off the chain. from the chat. Yes, it was the fourth round where Colby got his world shook. That's for sure. Yes, Daniel Valverde. Thank you very much. Michael O'Brien, the jiu-jitsu coach, and Cesar Carnero is the striking coach. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I know them by sight, and I was mixing up their names. I think those guys deserve a ton of credit. And another coach I was very impressed with today, one that I've been slow to get on the bandwagon for, was Kraus. I thought he did a good job, particularly in the Tim Elliott fight. I'm not sure if he had another one tonight, but in recent cards, James Krause has dialed it back a little bit. Sometimes he gets a little too vocal and actually, I think, confuses and pushes his fighters to do more than their cardio can support. So he seems to be dialing in the right amount of advice versus, stepping on his fighters' toes and confusing them a bit. John Wayne says Masvidal's upright stance is a problem for him moving. For sure, Khabib has the best lateral movement against Conor. He was never in danger while Jorge's footwork was lazy. E513, I think Jorge has 2 more fights, Nate, than Conor. That could be. If Conor has success, then he's less likely to face Masvidal. I don't think he faces Masvidal unless it's sort of a Hail Mary, because that's of the money type fights, the ones where there's nothing on the line but the egos of the fighters and the prestige of the event. I think Conor has too much to lose against Jorge to take that on, unless there's a very big upside, or Conor has no other big options. He's already fought Nate. He's already gotten beat by either a number one contender or in another title fight. And then as sort of a Hail Mary, that might be something Conor would go to. Okay. We'll go through the... Oh, for Colby, to finish up my thoughts on that, I'd like to get your opinion on it as well. And I will be opening the phone here in a minute so I can get some of your thoughts directly. Where Colby goes from here, I had said, clearly he's angling for the Dustin Poirier fight. That looks supremely unlikely at this point, although you can make an argument for how it might fall into place. So I don't expect to see Colby for a while. He's going to lay low, see what Usman gets next. Maybe if he can get himself into a verbal row with the right fighter, if it's not Poirier, then perhaps he comes back a little sooner. But I wouldn't expect to see him until middle or late fall at this point. He's clearly the number one contender, and another victory, definitely another 2 victories, I think he should get a third shot at Usman, because you can't punish a guy for being the next best guy. You have to give him a shot, but not right away. The second fight showed that Usman has solidified his place and shouldn't have to fight the same dude over and over, even if he is the number one contender. Opening the main card, we had Sergey Spivak versus Greg Hardy. Not much of a fight there. I don't know that it puts the nail in the coffin for Hardy's UFC career, but as we already talked about, not real pretty. He seemed... He really didn't even have enough time to show anything. And Spivak isn't, though he's good with the Greco-Roman wrestling, and that's how he ended up getting Hardy down, was with the chest-to-chest and chest-to-back pressure and grappling. but not a guy who's getting everybody down in the heavyweight division. It normally takes him a while. Hardy put up very little resistance. Second fight on the main card. This was a fun one. Kevin Holland, Alex Cowboy Oliveira. Holland, big favorite, minus 335. Ends up getting the TKO victory 38 seconds into the second round. And an uneven performance from Holland, but it was all heading in the right trajectory. Starting out, Cowboy was reserved and somehow worked a game plan. And his game plan wasn't just being technical, it was being a counter striker. And that's not how we normally see Oliveira. He normally likes to be aggressive. He's a bit of a wild man. And it wasn't until the 3/4 mark of maybe even later than that, where Oliveira actually went first on some significant strikes. He was sitting back, and Holland was still trying to find his range, get his sea legs under him at the new weight class, and really serving himself up on a platter to Oliveira a little bit, who played the role of wood chipper in the first half of the first round, landed some nice shots, was effective, but you could see that Holland was able to roll with even some of the larger punches and had a good mind for what he was trying to do. It was just taking him a while to adjust. When he landed strikes, even if the technique wasn't perfect, the timing and the placement was really impressive and quite promising for the rest of the fight if you're a Holland fan. Towards the end of the first round, he was very effective, starting to find his shots, but Oliveira won that first round, clearly, and there was a lot of frustration in the corner in between. Kevin Holland comes out in the second round, shot out of a cannon. Now he's just fighting, combining all of the game plan with urgency and some anger at himself. He turned that against Oliveira a little bit, and combining that, it gave his mind something to focus on rather than thinking, because you never want to think in a fight. You want to act or react. And so Holland was doing just that, and that's where you started, very quickly you saw his reflexes get up to 100% effective, able to counter and drop Oliveira and finish him off with the a few strikes for good measure. Excellent performance. I gave that a fight score of 90 out of 100, and for me, not a lot of fights get in the 90s. It wasn't a perfect fight. As I said, Holland had some shaky moments in that first round, but what I like to see, the positive part of that for me was that Holland was always searching for his stability, where he could get things together and start to implement his game plan and adjust to the speed and the strength or differences at 170 pounds. Third fight, the main card, Barboza Mitchell. This was a fun fight. This was everything, at least I was hoping for, a real test for Mitchell, who's had some success. He was 5-0 in the UFC. He'd had his run on The Ultimate Fighter. He's made a little bit of a name for himself with his earnest personality and his camo shorts. I mean, pretty much the only dude in the UFC who has unique shorts. He was able to get that twister early on in his UFC career, but even if it's a diminished Edson Barboza, he brought it's still a feather in the cap and heading in the right direction for Bryce Mitchell. Absolutely. And his performance, he combined, to me, you saw his farm strength and man of the earth or man of the soil determination. Just a guy who's connected to who he is and where he's from. We see something similar from a guy like Dustin Poirier. When you're connected, and there's lots of examples of that, you have that foundation. It gives you a stability and allows your skills free purchase. He won the unanimous decision. Two judges had it 30-25, or one had it 30-25, one 30-26, in the final 30-27. There was certainly at least one 10-8 round in there, and I wouldn't quibble over having two. He had quite a performance. And the thing that I saw that was very impressive about Mitchell in this one was he personified his moniker, Thug Nasty. He was nasty indeed in this fight. He brought a little more grit, a little more meanness to this fight than he has in the past, where he was a little more clinical, a little more like just a pure ground specialist. And a lot of those guys take the idea of jiu-jitsu being the gentle art very literally, and they consider themselves martial artists, and so they don't do all the little grimy, gritty, dirty things. And I don't mean dirty as in against the rules, but the really pouring on the ground and pound, taking the little shots when you can, rubbing your opponent's face, and just doing the things to make your opponent's experience miserable. But that's so much of Khabib was the best at that. All the little things to make you all the more miserable, and it helps to get, particularly if you're a grappler, all those things help if your goal is to get the finish. And the other thing I'll say about Mitchell, it hit me during the fight, is he's pretty much the only ground specialist that I wouldn't put in the category of the Spectrum boys. Your Ryan Halls and guys like that. They're all very nerdy, and you'd almost think passive when they're not actually in the cage. Where Bryce Mitchell, different, yet clearly a ground specialist. Maybe a little more like a Damian Maia in that way. Pretty normal, stable guy, and just happens to have this very good, extremely good ground skill. Ink says Bryce Mitchell was very impressive. Yeah. Fighting the number 10 guy, and Barboza's probably in decline, not getting any younger. Didn't seem to really be feeling the effects of the weight cut. They made an issue of that on the broadcast, but I didn't see it. We've seen even in the past that Mitchell is very heavy on guys. It doesn't show as much, but if you watch the opponent, you can tell just how heavy he is, because nobody's getting out from under him easily. And because he's such a dynamic grappler and submission artist, you can't make some of the wild, forceful moves to try to get your feet against the dude, because you're going to end up in a twister. You're going to end up in some sort of a position. It's a good combination for Mitchell. I don't know what his absolute upside is. He'll be in the top 10, but at 145 pounds, it's going to put the pressure on him. You know, what would he look like against a Brian Ortega? What's he going to look like against a Kevin Kattar? What's he going to look like against those top guys that can handle the takedown attempts and absolutely box you up or outstrike most guys if they can keep it on the feet? That'll be the next big challenge for Bryce. Young dude, still real early in his UFC career. He's a fun one to watch. He's just exciting. I am going to open the phones. So the phone number is 206-276-8384. Go ahead and give that a call if you want. And we'll see if we can't make a little phone call magic. I do want to thank Colton Fry for a $5 donation. I appreciate it. Certainly helps. He says, I wonder if Jorge was hesitant at all since he got knocked out by Usman. Yeah, that is a good question. And I'd wondered that myself. He didn't seem to be in the beginning, but Colby's pressure is going to make damn near anybody hesitant. Particularly when the pressure leads to... he's basically static cling. You throw Colby in the dryer without a bounce, and everything's coming out stuck to him. You know, the dude just clings to you, and then it only gets worse from there. And I think that created a lot of hesitancy from Jorge. He was able to have the success like we talked about with the kicks to the lower leg. Quite honestly, the biggest problem was beyond the pressure and the grappling was that Colby was able to slip a lot of the punches. And so he was slipping the first and second strike from Jorge. And what's really hard to do against a great wrestler is to throw long combinations. It gives them too much time to take you down. It was a no-win situation for Jorge. He was either going to get a one-shot knockout or he was going to get dominated for the most part. And I thought I saw by the end of the third round, Jorge was he was waiting in positions and holding positions instead of trying to get up, which told me not only is he conserving energy, but the dude at this point, he's trying to save his brand. Because he doesn't want to end up like Tyron Woodley and actually get retired by Colby. If Colby would have gotten Jorge completely tired out, just say Jorge had put 100% in trying, if he had pulled a Moicano and put everything, his whole heart into trying to win this fight, he might have ended up like Moicano, completely busted up and broken, and then his career's basically over, and his ability to earn, and he's got this new fat contract with UFC. Jorge sort of threw in the towel, so his team didn't have to. He didn't have to take the damage, and there's nothing dishonorable about that. It also gave him the opportunity that the start of the fourth and the start of the fifth, he's still there to take his shot to crack Colby's jaw once again. Timothy Steiner says, Hamzat is getting frustrated. Oh, sorry, I misread that. Is getting fast-tracked. Yes. That was one of the topics that I wanted to bring up later, which was the Hamzat-Gilbert Burns fight. We'll circle around and talk about that in a little bit. I just want to finish the main card. The co-main event, Rafael dos Anjos, 6th-ranked guy. At least he was at welterweight. I don't think he's actually ranked at 170 or at 155. Well, we do have a call. Let's see here. Hello, you are live. What's your name and what's your question? Oh, you dropped. Go ahead and call back. One of these days I'll have a producer and they'll be able to handle all that stuff. But yeah, go ahead and try calling back, or if anybody has a question or a comment, thoughts about last night's card, what's coming up, the Makachev issue, they're all fair game. So yeah, Dos Anjos versus Moicano. I've always thought Moicano he's a dark horse. He's a dark horse in the division, and in any fight you put him in. He was really throwing great strikes that were straight, and a lot of his aggression was straight up the middle, whether they were front kicks to the midsection, his uppercut, which damaged Dos Anjos, very good up the middle. We have another call here. Hello, you are live. What's your name and what's your question?
Anonymous. I don't have a question. I just wanted to say that I'm a fan and keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Have a good day.
You too.
Hello, you are live. What's your name and what's your thought?
What's up, man?
Hey, man.
My name's Adam. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I've been a fan of your YouTube channel for a while now. First time caller.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
My wife is a marriage family therapist. I'm a professional musician, etc. And I'm into arts education and love analyzing things from a kind of armchair psychoanalytic perspective.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that you take that view on MMA. It's much needed, or entertaining and much needed.
Thank you. Yeah, I think so. It answers a lot of, or at least the speculation, as Chael talks about. It opens up the personalities of the fighters a little bit. I think it gives some dimension to the fight game. It's not just the punches and kicks. These are people, and so if they're people, we should know their personalities a little bit. That's my perspective.
Absolutely. I think, I'm trying to bring that sort of perspective to arts education, and it's like people forget, especially when it comes to MMA and then also just creating music, that the product that we're seeing is the manifestation of an intense psychological process that's just manifesting through a sport or manifesting through music. And all of our motivations are sort of rooted in the imperfect way we navigate the self.
Right.
In doing that. So I wanted to share a theory with you about it that I have.
All right.
I'm curious to get your thoughts.
Let's hear it.
All right. So the theory is basically like why MMA is the fastest growing sport. And I have it charted on an axis, so it's a little bit hard to express without seeing the little chart that I did.
Okay.
Kind of nerded out on this chart. But so picture mapping out various sports on this axis. So on the vertical axis, at the very top, you have like a simultaneous combination of like a high complexity of skill that it takes to do this sport.
Right.
And winning or losing has a really high likelihood of like serious social or health consequences.
Okay.
So like you're seriously embarrassed or you get seriously injured. And then the bottom would be really low complexity of skill and low likelihood of serious health consequences or social consequences.
And wrap up the theory, just because I don't want to lose everybody I'm interested in it, but I don't want to lose everybody in the chat and everything. So,
okay, I'll make it quick. Yeah. So here's the big part. On the very left it's a metaphor for actual war or battle. And then on the right it's actual war or battle.
Okay.
And MMA is off on its own on the far right because it's the closest thing to actual war or fighting.
Right.
That isn't. So it's like socially acceptable. It's a sport still. And then it has the highest likelihood of serious health consequences and serious social consequences. So like last night, before the fight especially, now all the wind comes out of this at the end when Jorge gets on the after the fight and just goes, "Oh, my wrestling wasn't cool," and like he takes all the wind out of the fact that how embarrassing it was for him.
Right.
But we're so tied into it because it's like, oh my God, I can't even imagine Jorge losing because he's going to be so unbelievably embarrassed and injured, and we're just like, we're so locked into that because it's the closest thing to just a war between friends or like a war between nations.
Which is why a lot of sports fans get pissed if they hear that the home team is going out with some of the guys from the rival team the night before or the night after. You want to believe that it's real, that it's serious, that it has consequences, because we invest ourselves in watching. We want the athletes to be invested emotionally and not just competitively. And I think you're absolutely right. The social consequences are so serious with fighting, with MMA, that it's much closer. The fighter, the athlete, is more aligned with the fan in that way, in that their investment is nearly total, because it has to be,
Yeah.
as you've pointed out. So I really appreciate the call, man. Call back another time, and maybe we can get a little more into your theory. I appreciate it very much. That's cool. Yeah, I've thought about that. Probably not the way he's grafted out, but the idea that it's so, to put it in the most basic terms, fighting is just so real. It's visceral. And there's a pageantry to the violence and to the chaotic nature of how things can turn around, which brings us back to the Rafael dos Anjos versus Renato Moicano fight. Everybody wanted that fight to end in the third round, except for Moicano and apparently Mark Goddard. He was going out on a limb, and that's not normally how Goddard does it. He's normally, not that he's quick to call a fight, but he's very decisive. What is interesting about Goddard is once he makes his mind up, he's going to follow that way past ever changing his mind. And if you follow him on Twitter at all, you can see that he's a little bit of a wacky guy with some of his ideas. And I think we saw this play out. That once he decided Moicano wasn't finished, there was virtually nothing Dos Anjos was going to be able to do to finish that fight unless Moicano was out cold. I wasn't super impressed with the way things were handled to start the fourth round or was it the fifth round, when Goddard calls in the doctor. And the doctor, I don't know who this doctor was. Normally in Vegas, they've got the lady doctor, and she seemed solid. This guy seemed very much like a company man, that he wanted every fight to go forward. He didn't want to piss off the fans. And he says, it was picked up on Goddard's mic, well, you could stop the fight. It's reasonable to stop the fight, essentially, is what he says. But he can see. And Goddard doesn't miss a beat. He's like, all right, if you can see, you can fight. And I didn't like that theory of moving forward. To me, that's your mind was already made up. Look at the damage. Look at all these other factors. It's not just whether or not he can see. I don't have a problem with him allowing the fight to continue at that point. But that was his methodology, or that was his criteria, I think could go to some bad places in the future. And then in the fifth round, that was interesting, and I give Goddard credit, because most refs would think this, but they wouldn't tell the fighter. When he says to Moicano, just before the start of the fifth round, I'm giving you 30 seconds to prove yourself. If you don't, the fight's over. And so on one decision, I'd question Goddard's methodology. The next decision, where he's telling the fighter exactly what he expects and what he needs to see, I think that's great. So at the end of it, Goddard got it right. And that's good, because when Mark is on his game, he is one of the best refs. When he gets a little emotionally tweaked or feels that somebody's pushing him, he's not good in those situations. He's not cool under fire. He doesn't like to be questioned. He doesn't like to be confronted. But yeah, so I'd like to think that that's some growth from Goddard, because we can use all the good refs that are available. I'm always disappointed when you see Goddard instead of Peterson. But I think for Keith Peterson, it's tough because they're loath to put the dude in with anybody bigger than lightweight. I mean, they've done it. And I believe the biggest, I think, was 205ers. But, and I understand that. Mark Goddard's a bigger guy. He can, Herb Dean, bigger guy. They can handle and have more of a presence in there. But Peterson's getting to the point where he's handling guys really well, showing he just doesn't make the obvious mistakes. He doesn't make the stupid mistakes. He should be rewarded for that. So at the end of the fight, they go a full 5 rounds. Dos Anjos gets the unanimous decision. And Moicano, he's fully displaying. He's not ready to quit the fight, I guess is what I'm trying to say. He pushes the cut man away twice. The second time, pretty hard. Just like you could tell he just wanted to walk around, stalk the cage with the blood on his face. He earned it. He didn't want to hide from it. He didn't want to be cleaned up right in that moment. He wanted to be in that. He wanted to continue in the emotion and in the power of the moment. He didn't get the victory, but he fought well. And as I said earlier, Moicano is an absolute damn dark horse at 155 pounds. No, I don't see him going on a title run, but if he had a little more personality and social game, the guy would be a player at least in the contender type matchups. And I think very much like Vicente Luque. To me, they're peas in a pod. Both dudes are savage, are killers, are lethal. Couple decisions, couple losses against quality opponents, and we forget all about them. Or Sean Shelby forgets all about them. When they get middling matchups where even if they win, it's not going to really raise their stock very much. Hopefully, Moicano is going to get some kind of a matchup that really puts him in a position to advance his career. As for Dos Anjos, it's been said before, Chael says it all the time, the guy has the best strength of schedule of any fighter in the modern era. And he's right. The dude just fights. Makachev jumped in, said he wanted the fight. But of course he didn't really want the fight, and most likely it was his manager Ali sticking his nose in there, running the accounts as he does for pretty much everybody but Khabib. I think Khabib was so concerned that Ali would say something that would be shameful. Because Khabib's very protective of his image as a man of faith and not just as a fighter. There are bigger goals for him. As I've said for a long time, even before he retired, the dude has aspirations to lead his country. He doesn't want to be under Russian control. He wants to be a free, independent state. And whether or not he wants to be president, he wants to have a hand in the government. So he's not going to allow Ali to run his Twitter account. Well, for Islam, he's kind of a goofy guy. You can tell he's a little more free-spirited than Khabib, and his English is not to the point where maybe he feels comfortable all the time running the Twitter account. So Ali gets it, and as Dana said in an interview, I thought I had the fight made. I turn around, I go to sleep, I wake up the very next morning, and Makachev has declined, even though Dos Anjos was willing to fight at 170 pounds. And so Dana says, absolutely now Makachev has to fight Dariush. Well, he should have had to anyway, in my opinion. And so I wonder if part of what's going on here is that Dana is sending a message to his manager, Ali, that you've been working this gimmick for a long time, and sometimes we've bought it. Sometimes we've rewarded you for some of these behaviors. But if you're going to jump in and say you're going to take a fight, your fighter better take that fight. Because Khabib made a lot of promises, not quite like this situation, but he said a lot of things that you knew he was never going to do. You know, Khabib is not the anyone, anytime, anywhere. He's a guy that I will do what I say I'm going to do. And will come up with a game plan and figure out who I should fight. Ali got a little bit over his skis, and I think it cost his client in this case. And normally, whether you're a fan of his personality or not, the guy gets the best for his fighters that he can. Let's get back to the chat here real quick before we circle around and get to some of the other questions. Colton Fry says he's calling it now. Conor will fight for the title when it comes back, and it will be against Oliveira. I believe Oliveira will submit Justin and line it up for Conor. Yeah, people are forgetting about the fight, and it was announced. In fact, the fight card, they showed the fight card, not a real good one for Oliveira versus Gaethje. I don't think they have all the fights, but right now was a Shogun against Ovince St. Preux. That's crazy. I didn't know. I thought both those guys were out of the UFC. I actually thought I had heard that St. Preux was cut, which I was disappointed when I thought I heard it, if that makes any sense, because I've always been an advocate of that guy. He has his ups and his downs, but he's got fighting spirit, and the dude never left his small camp. I think he could have been much better if he would have gone somewhere where he could train with more talented big guys and maybe coaches with a little more traction in the sport. But all considered, an ex-football player went an awful long way in the UFC, so I've always liked him. And Shogun, dude's a classic. He's an absolute legacy fighter and hails back to the early modern era and coming over from Pride and being an absolute legend, but, well past his sell-by date. And the same with St. Preux at this point. So not a very solid co-main if that's how it stays. I can't believe that's how it's going to stay at this point. I believe Oliveira, and I'll do an episode on this, and we'll do a full breakdown at some point, but Oliveira, I believe, beats Gaethje. Gaethje isn't, with his hands, he's not a one-punch guy, but with those damn leg kicks, he's damn near a one-kick threat to end the fight. We've seen the kind of damage he can lay on dudes with those leg kicks. It's so fast, and it's not actually just that they're fast, and it's not that there isn't any tell at all. It's really more his rhythm or lack of rhythm. They don't come when you expect them to come. He's very crafty in that way. So that with Oliveira and those skinny legs of his, if he's compromised early enough, that could definitely put Gaethje in a position to win. Barring that, over the course of 5 rounds, or even in a phone booth situation, I think Oliveira comes out ahead. I think he has a better chin than Gaethje. Don't forget the Gaethje, even going all the way back to World Series of Fighting, dudes who were never going to sniff the UFC were nearly knocking out Gaethje when he was champ. I can't remember the guy's name. He was way undersized for the division, and actually fought Gaethje twice, if I recall. And I can't remember his name. Somebody in the chat will, I'm sure. But he knocked Gaethje down several times with strikes. A very hittable guy. Now, Gaethje's progressed massively since then, of course. And he's learned a game plan. But if the idea is to draw Oliveira into some kind of a slugfest with leg strikes as well, I don't think that works well for Gaethje. The problem being that I don't think Gaethje can win a technical striking match against Oliveira the way he was able to do with Ferguson. I think Oliveira has too many options, and always an option to bring it to the grappling realm. And I believe Oliveira has a better gas tank than Gaethje, or at least his concern about the gas tank isn't nearly as strong, where Gaethje is petrified of becoming tired in the cage, which is, as he said many times, that's why he doesn't grapple. He never initiates grappling for that reason. He just doesn't want to be running on E heading into the second or third round, and who can blame him? That's a horrible thing. And that was the guiding force of Tyron Woodley's career as well. Completely changed him as a fighter after that Jay Heron knockout, which was in part because Tyron had gotten tired from grappling. And we saw it in the Jake Paul fight. Tyron had gotten a little tired, a little lackadaisical, thought that he could just coast for the rest, got knocked out. So the guys that are very keen to avoid getting tired, it's smart. And you can only raise your gas tank so high. Some guys, like a Diaz or even a Covington, they get tired, or sometimes it looks like Colby doesn't actually get tired, but they'll get tired, or Tony Ferguson. You can tell they're tired, but they know how to fight when they're winded, when their body's screaming for more oxygen. But there are other fighters, and I think it's just the way your body is. I don't think there's a whole hell of a lot you can do with it. It's not just a mental situation. Pulse Reloaded says Arnold Allen versus Bryce Mitchell next. That I love. That is the suggestion of the week for sure. And Arnold Allen, that dude's still undefeated. Am I wrong? Talk about a slow play to being a contender or being in a place of prominence. I'm guessing because of everything being crazy over the last 2 years, and him being in England, that's slowed things down as well, and perhaps he had some injuries I'm not recalling. But man, that guy needs to be more active because he's exciting. He's got an interesting personality. There's nothing the UFC loves better than a dude from the UK with some ability to fight. You don't have to have much, in fact. There's plenty of guys in the history of the UFC who pretty much only maintain a roster spot because they were British. It's a big demographic. We saw that early in the days of when they were first bringing in fighters from Australia as well. They tried to play up George Soteropoulos like he was the next coming of Gracie or something. John Wayne says, I want to see Tony move to 170 and have a fun fight with Wonder Boy or Gamebred. Thoughts? Hey, I would have never thought Wonder Boy, but that would be interesting. Yeah, in a weird way, that might be a safer fight for Tony if he is actually spent and should retire. Because Wonder Boy, if he can control him at distance and point him, he'll do that. He sort of carries fights like that. Wonder Boy does. Ends up biting him in the ass sometimes, where he ends up not getting a decision where he could have, like with Darren Till. But that's interesting. Against Gamebred, that would be a big fight for Tony, but I don't know. It seems like Tony's next fight needs to be lower key. It needs to be established if he can be Tony Ferguson again. Because it's not just that he lost. The Gaethje fight, people forget, but he was within probably 10 seconds of finishing that fight. The round ends. And after that, Gaethje had a lot of discipline and did not brawl. He just moved when he wasn't sticking. A lot more moving than sticking until he got the rhythm of it, and Tony got frustrated and just started walking onto every shot in the world. But it wasn't a back and forth fight in that second half. But in the first half, Tony was doing great. It's after that fight, the wheels seemed to fall off. The Dariush fight to me is the most problematic because he couldn't get out from under Dariush. Now, Dariush was not trying to advance position per se. He wasn't laying down heavy ground and pound. He was putting all of his effort into just holding Tony down, believing that that would give him, they would get him to a place in his career that he was never able to do. And God bless the guy, because he went out on his shield countless times. He got into brawls when he never should have. He doesn't owe it to anybody to brawl with Tony, because that's all Tony could do in that fight. So, I don't know. At 170, how about Nico Price? Just popped into my head. There's a wild man. Let Tony fight Nico Price. Nico's got some ground skills, but he's not going to be a wet blanket. If he does take Tony down, it's to do damage or to advance position. And that fight would tell us if Tony had anything at 170. The other one would be Michael Chiesa. Now, that's a bigger fight, and kind of goes against what I was saying, that he needs to come back in a lower profile fight. But if he's going to come back against a higher opponent, further along the pecking order, Michael Chiesa would be a good one. It's also good because, for the most part, Chiesa doesn't have the one-punch power, the stunning power that a lot of guys do. And it'd be exciting because Chiesa is so aggressive for the offense when grappling. He puts himself in bad positions by being overly aggressive. That's why, for being a bit of a whiz on the ground, the dude gets submitted a lot. Well, because he doesn't play it safe. And to me, that would lead to a fun fight. So great suggestion, especially with the Wonder Boy. Angelo Philippoussos. I'm probably murdering the last name. I apologize. If Masvidal would have pounced in the 4th round after putting him down, yeah, it'll come back to that. And I believe he was just so, not just tired with the cardio, but muscularly tired, that the only thing his body wanted, I think his body would have betrayed him. In that moment, you could see him sort of come forward a little bit, raise up a little bit, and then he sank back down onto his feet and just maintained distance. He was right there. He wasn't doing something else. He wasn't even moving laterally to find an angle. He was just hanging out in front of Covington, letting him recover. And quite honestly, even though it was Colby who was stunned, it was really Masvidal who needed the recovery more, apparently. This wasn't a situation where he was being too cool to be aggressive, the way Nate Diaz would do or Nick would do at times. So, if, again, it's my thought that Masvidal made the concerted decision to not be submitted or embarrassed. By the 3rd round, things had gone poorly. He was very drained. His corner was concerned about his cardio. You could see that in the way they were handling him. And once you sort of check out of a fight and decide, you start thinking. You think how you can conserve energy. You're not working your game plan. You're not reacting or acting in the moment. You're plotting. You're looking for space to catch your breath. Totally understandable. But once you're thinking in a fight, it's going to be hard to, in the moment, react when an opening appears. And even when it's as wide as the opening seemed to be in that 4th round, tough for Masvidal to flip that switch. With Moicano, he never turned off the switch. He was on full go, full kill mode the whole time. That's why no matter how bad it got, he only knew keep going, keep fighting. And as soon as everybody was ready to bury him, he still landed some good shots. There was a phone call. Go ahead and call back. I missed it. I didn't see it. I'll let you on. We are rounding the corner here. We've been on 90 minutes. So go through the chat a little bit more. Maybe take a call and then come back next week. And let me know in the comments or in the comment on the video or on Twitter if you would be interested in a evening live stream Fridays to talk about the cards for Saturday night. It'd probably be something like 6 or 7 o'clock East Coast time. But I've been thinking about that. The main thing, though, is I finally am. I've gotten an office, so I'm putting that together. I had it set up last week just in the house, but now I've got an actual spot. So there will be episodes coming out. I've been trying to make that happen for a long time, but it's coming together. I'm excited. Oh, the Obama phone. Yeah, that's funny. So yes, there definitely will be episodes, and that is the priority. I'm excited to get back into that and do some of the deep dives and some of the fun stuff we've done in the past. All right. Yeah, absolutely. Jerry Lynn points out that you don't have to hate the loser to pump up the winner. It's true for fans as well as fighters. It's just a more stable mindset. It doesn't mean you have to be milquetoast. You can't trash talk. You can't be an a-hole at times. But it makes you more aware and smarter. Ultimately, that's the end result. If you can understand the other person, even if you don't like them or anything about them. If you just dismiss them and you make them one-dimensional, you're actually hurting yourself because now you understand things less because instead of actually analyzing the person, whether it's a fighter or an opponent in some other arena, political arena or otherwise, you now have basically a blank spot where there could have been information. So, Chief Ness says Oliveira's leg would snap like sticks. Going back to the comment about Justin Gaethje, yeah. Ali Shorkree says Oliveira has a better chin than Gaethje. Yeah, I think so. Oliveira's shown a prone, particularly at 145. His chin wasn't the most stable thing in the world, and I wouldn't tout Charles as having a Dan Henderson type chin or something like that. But yeah, Gaethje, well, and part of it maybe I'm putting too much credence in the fact that Gaethje's a little bit punch drunk. He always sounds a little punch drunk. So I wonder, and we've seen in the past, even in the fights that Gaethje's won in the UFC, particularly the first 5-6 fights, at any moment he could have gone out. He was on wobbly legs. And so he is good at recovering. And I think that's where Oliveira is at this point, too. So I wouldn't make a hard argument that Oliveira's dramatically better at taking a shot than Gaethje. Just that his recoverability has improved a lot. And Gaethje has improved by not getting in that situation. So I'm still assuming his recoverability or his chin is a little bit squishy. Like in the Michael Johnson fight and the and Eddie Alvarez fight and all of those. It's more the technique that keeps him away from those situations that's saved Gaethje. So if they got into just a phone booth situation, I think Oliveira comes out on top, as we saw with Dustin Poirier. Okay. Ali now says that he believes he's going to guarantee me Oliveira gets knocked out unless he cheats. Okay. Well, okay. Perhaps. Was it getting weird in the chat section here? People are arguing. Whatever it is, get over it, dudes. Nadav Drew asks, will Tony be cut with another loss? I don't see them ever cutting Tony. I believe of all the times the UFC dropped the ball with Tony, they're not going to allow him to go out looking disrespected. Tony helped the UFC. He was a company man every time they needed him to be. And I think for the longest time, Dana doesn't like guys he doesn't understand. And who understands Tony? And Dana really didn't understand Tony. So for a long time, the relationship was strained. But I believe now Dana has a big place in his heart for Ferguson. And if it comes to a point where they don't find a sensible matchup, a meaningful matchup for the company and for the fighter, that is Tony Ferguson, I think they find a graceful way to help him exit the sport. At least that's my hope. It's not going to be an anonymous, somebody tweets it because they just noticed that Tony Ferguson is no longer on the roster. I think he basically gets one more shot to see whether or not he's a premier fighter or can be an entertaining fighter anymore. And if not, the UFC probably put the pressure. And Tony's got all his other stuff. You know, Tony, he's talked about going back to school. He's certainly interested in coaching. And you know, if he needs to be shown the door, hopefully they do it with some decorum. Thanks, Inc. Friday preview stream sounds great. Yeah, I like that idea. Keep it super casual. For the Sunday shows, as they get going, again, I'm going to bring in some video and do some more technical stuff. The Friday thing would probably be a little more free-flowing. The Sunday deal is pretty free-flowing right now, but once I get everything totally set up, like I said, be a little more production value going on. When will John Morgan do 10 push-ups for Colby? Well, they won't all be in one day. He may do 10, but my man John's probably going to spread them out over a period of weeks. But look, the guy probably has solid arms. We know he's a big beer drinker. You can't do that many curls with the old Pabst Blue Ribbon and not have built up some musculature. I like John Morgan. People like to give him a hard time, but I like the dude. Michael Sims, was it a work where two friends fake a beef into reality and stacks of cash, or two dudes that really wanted to hurt each other? Well, that is the question, man. I know it got dismissed, and I heard parts of preview shows from different pundits around, commentators, and everybody was very dismissive of the idea that it was somewhat put on, to any degree put on. And my thought is people maybe weren't looking deep enough, that it doesn't have to be that they're both completely in on it, that they sit down and write out a plan and they 2 years ago. It could be that Jorge got a little jealous and started looking at Colby more critically. Have you ever had a best friend that started to succeed, or maybe you guys are both, you didn't realize that he was interested in a gal you were interested in, and all of a sudden he starts hitting on her or even starts dating her? That didn't affect you? It's very common. So there's all sorts of reasons that one guy or the other might have started to become a little agitated or bristly towards the other. And for George, look, remember, he started showing up to press conferences dressed like Al Pacino. The guy plays a character. He's much better at playing characters than Colby is. Colby doesn't have as much personality, so his characters are flat and phony, because he's not phony as a person. He's just he's a little less developed, to give him the benefit of the doubt. Jorge's a more fully developed personality, so he can play these roles. And I'll give a little bit of a preview of where I'm heading with the episode, because I do plan on putting it out in the next 2 weeks. It's the Bobby Riggs story. If you remember Bobby Riggs and Billie Jean King. That turned out to be that Bobby Riggs threw that match. And I don't believe that he originally planned to build up, because he was a promoter after he retired. He'd been retired from tennis for 30 years. So it just gives a little weight or a little proof of concept of the idea that somebody who's a hustler, and wouldn't you call Jorge Masvidal a hustler in all the best senses? He self-promotes himself. He has his own fighting league now. He got himself into a spot where he's one of the top 3 or 4 names in the UFC, and he doesn't have the resume to match it. It doesn't mean he's not an OG. It doesn't mean that he's not fun to watch. It doesn't mean that we don't all love him. But because we see him as more authentic, don't turn that around and then assume that the guy's never playing a role. The guy's always playing a role. He used to play the silent badass role with a chip on his shoulder. Now he's playing a new role. He plays several roles. So it very well, and Dan Lambert and ATT, they actually were part of a wrestling promotion for a while. You see the videos where Colby and several other guys from the gym were doing a wrestling skit. And I didn't know what wrestling organization it was, so it was out of context for me, but it was shot and it was on TV or wherever they put it. And everybody has said that early on in Colby's character gimmick career, that Dan Lambert was one of the dudes who was helping him write his lines, or at least come up with the concept. So it's not out of the... It's not... Look, it's always good to question narratives. And if everybody's on a narrative, that's when you should question it the most. If for no other reason, because you should understand why it's true. There's too much pressure to just go along when everybody believes something to be true or not to be true. So that's kind of where I'm going with this episode, looking into just how much of a work or a shoot the feud between these boys actually is. Adam Watt asks and donated $5. Thanks, brother. Chess, a metaphor for war. Soccer, right in the middle between war and metaphor. MMA, the closest to war. So much so that it's a metaphor for life. Okay. I'm assuming you are the one that called in then, Adam. Thank you for that. That helps solidify it. You should send me something through Twitter. Just make some contact. Send me your graph or send me a link so I can see what you're talking about. I always like to see visuals with things. Yeah, chess from a physical standpoint. And I think right now that's what you're describing, is the physical aspect, that it's metaphoric, because there's no physical danger in chess and very little physical movement at all. Soccer, in the middle, and MMA, very close to war. Yeah, well, men fight for 2 reasons. For access to females and to protect their community. That's pretty much, that is sewn into the DNA of men in general. So it's not crazy. And of course, women are going to like fighting, to watch fighting as fans, at least some, because it is a display of pure masculine drive. Men weed themselves out, and women get to pick the ones they want. I mean, it's a great setup. So yeah, absolutely. And war is the an all-out war is the ultimate culmination of the biological drive. It's either the drive to conquer or the drive to survive, and those are that, along with procreation, those are the three intertwined drives that motivate men, or mankind, I should say. And thanks for the donation, Adam. Again, definitely send the diagram you have. Earl Goldberg, brother, a goddamn newt needs to show in Vienna. Yeah, I'd love to do a show in Vienna. Absolutely. Thank you for the euros. That's like real money, much more than the US dollar. I appreciate it, brother. You know, there is a thought that one of these days, as I can fully get into it, the ultimate goal would be to do live things. Yeah, we talked about it a while ago. I think you were in on it too, where we talked it'd be fun. Go to whatever city the fight is in and have like a bowling night on Thursday before the fight or Friday before the fight, and just have a bunch of people get together and drink some beers and pretend to do something athletic to hide the fact that we're just drinking beers and talking fighting. But that's enough. That's enough to do. There's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, getting over to Europe, that'd be great. A few more. Yes, yeah. It's difficult to, speaking to Adam here, saying that it's difficult to put his theory into a few words. And I didn't mean to press him on time, but when there's no visuals on the screen for pretty much the whole show, and then it's difficult to hang on to have somebody elaborate something complex. But another time, could unpack it a little more. Ink says he likes Jon too. I found the little sideshow beef between him and Colby entertaining for now. Yeah, some people were offended by it. To me, it's clearly shtick on Colby's part. It's a little uncomfortable because he's making fun of the dude because he's heavy. It makes it a little better that Morgan isn't somebody who's pretending that he isn't heavy. But at the same time, look, you're the one with all the power in that situation, Colby, or most of it. And you put Jon in a no-win situation, because if he snaps back at Colby, it hurts his employment situation. And Morgan handled it much better than, like Ariel was not very good when he was put in situations in the media, and like Luke Thomas famously basically left interacting with fighters completely in person to person during fight week because Jon Jones refused to ask a question. And to me, you know, if you're supposed to be a writer, you're supposed to be a wordsmith, and you know, you maybe you think you're quasi tough because you're reporting on or media for a combat sport, and a dude just says he doesn't want to answer a question from you, and you just fold your tent and go home. That never made sense to me, and that actually makes me a little concerned about Donk, that he folds so quickly. He did the same thing with Chael. When he no-sold Chael's retirement, and Chael destroyed Donk twice, and it's rough, because you'd like to think, I think the guy's smart enough to have some comebacks, and to, at the very least, when Jon says, I'm not going to answer your questions, then just pivot to that's back in the day when they had a bunch of people on stage for the press conferences. So say, well, if Jon's too cool to talk to me, then I'll ask you, whomever else. But some people just don't have the verbal fighting mentality. And John Morgan is, he's a fight announcer for, I can't remember which feeder league, but it's one of the larger known ones, and they've got good fights. it was LFA, I think. I'm probably wrong. But anyways, he does a good job. He's got a great voice. He's got a very good voice for things. He does a good job with it. And so he can laugh it off, or if he had to, he could come back with a zinger of his own. And you'd expect, if somebody's in the media, they should be able to do that. So, it can be a verbally contact sport, in my opinion. Okay. Another somebody says Jorge's new tattoo is badass. Dumbass. Yeah, it's not great. It's not. It was better in theory than practice, as I said before. Jesse Black asks, what was it he kept saying Covington said about his kids? I don't know. He's going on some stupid thing that Dustin's kid looks like Conor McGregor. It's just silly. Oh, Inc., thank you for reminding me. This is one of the bullet points I'd made to talk about. Completely shift the conversation. I did want to point out something I thought in the initial stages, finding out about Cain Velasquez allegedly shooting a guy. And then more information came out, and a friend of mine, she's a bit of a news hound. And so when she heard about a UFC fighter, she figured, well, I would know who that was. Well, of course, we all know who Cain is. And I was explaining, and this was before any context was known. And I tried to explain to her who Cain was, and the way I explained it was, he's sort of this very soft-spoken, in fact, almost no-spoken, humble guy, true wrestling mentality. He's a grinder. He ended up developing really great striking skills, but essentially the guy is solid and never showed violence outside of the context of a fight. Not one time can I think of Cain using his physicality to even cut in line or something. He just is a guy who always comported his physicality. He always had it under control, like it was never an issue. And I also told her that the one thing I know about it is he loves his family. So then when the news came out that he was accused of shooting a dude who had done inappropriate things to a relative or perhaps to his daughter, it made sense because of those attributes that he should bring violence. And this is the one thing that maybe is a little unique. It's interesting that Cain used a gun because he clearly could have killed that pathetic pervert with his bare hands. And one would think you'd get more satisfaction out of the physical act of throttling somebody either into deep pain or death with your own hands. It's not what he did. It's not what he chose to do, because I can't assume he was just cruising around and randomly had a gun in his car. He planned to do that. And for me, the takeaway that I have with the situation is it tells me that for Cain, it was about justice. I'm not saying that he's right. If he would have used his hands, it would have been for himself, for his own sense of regaining what he lost because somebody hurt somebody he cared for. But Cain didn't do that. Cain tried to use a gun. And that style of vigilantism is associated with, they call it vigilante justice. And that was his natural inclination, was, I need to do this clean. I need to do it somewhat unemotionally in that sense. And to me, that's another, it points to, it's a credit to Cain. And it would have been better had he not done it. But from his perspective, the justice system was failing and had failed him, and he sought justice. It was for actual honor, not his own honor, but that justice be served, nobody else ever get hurt, and he would take care of it. And that's very different than somebody who finds out something like that has happened and they go out all reckless and try to kill people with their bare hands. That's usually, they want the respect that they lost back. It's very much more personal. So that, take what you will of that. That was just my perspective about Cain, that the way he chose to go about dealing with the perpetrator shows that even in that difficult situation, he was concerned with what was right more than his own feelings and satisfying those. Well, brothers and sisters, we have gone 3 hours. No, we've gone 2 hours. There we go. Losing my mind. Another successful show. This is 2 in a row. Next week will be 3 in a row, and let's hope it starts on time at 11 o'clock Western Standard Time. I appreciate everybody showing up. I appreciate the donations. Very much appreciated, though not expected. Don't be afraid to reach out to me. Send me an email at alpacathosaurus@yahoo.com. You can find me on Twitter. Let me know what you're thinking. Ideas for an episode, something, a clip you want me to break down. I'm getting after it. It's coming. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Until next time.
It is the harmony of overwhelming and collective murder. It is not that I hate it, I love it. I love it very much, but I love it against my better judgment. And we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in the field.